He woke up to the sound of birds. That was the first thing that was wrong. There were no birds on a battlefield. There was wind, and the sound of men who were past making sounds, and the particular silence of snow absorbing everything. There were no birds, but he could hear them now, clearly, close, the specific song of a bird that nested in the plum tree outside his palace window, and he lay very still and listened to it and thought, I am not dead. He opened his eyes. The ceiling above him was the ceiling of his bedchamber. He knew every grain of that wood. He had stared at it on enough sleepless nights to have memorized it the way you memorize a face. He sat up slowly. The room was exactly as it should be. The writing table, the ink stone, the stack of administrative documents his secretary had left for morning review, the window with its latticed frame and the early light coming through it in thin gold bars. Everything in its correct position. Everything ordinary. He pressed both hands flat against the sleeping mat beneath him. He thought, this is real. This floor is real. This room is real. He thought. Then the battlefield was also real. And the snow. And her hand in his, the fingers going slack. Not all at once, but in the slow, terrible way of something that is deciding whether to hold on and finally deciding not to. He pressed the heels of his palms against his eyes. He sat like that for a long time. When he took his hands away, the light had not changed. The birds were still singing. The documents were still waiting. The world had continued without asking his permission, which was what the world always did. He stood. He crossed to the window and looked out at the courtyard. The plum trees were bare. Early spring, before the blossoms, which put him at, he calculated, 4 months before the crown princess selection ceremony. He had time. Not infinite time, but enough. He looked at his hands again in the morning light. Young. Unmarked. The scar on his left wrist from a blade he had gripped wrong on a battlefield that had not yet happened, gone. He thought about the moment on that battlefield when he had understood, too late, the full shape of what she had been doing for 2 years. The invisible work. The coded letters. The favors deployed through her father's network to protect a man who was too busy grieving a love that was not real to notice he was being saved. He thought about what he had said to her at the very end, in the snow, with both of them running out of breath. Then if we are reborn, let us fight this marriage. He had said it like a joke. Or not a joke. Like something you say when there is no time left for anything but honesty, when the performance has burned away and what remains is just the true thing. He had not meant let us be enemies. He had meant, let us meet as equals from the beginning. Let us fight for the right to choose each other rather than being arranged into each other's lives by other people's agendas. Let us be loud about it instead of silent. Let us argue. Let us disagree. Let us be present for each other rather than beside each other. He had meant, let us start differently. He pressed his forehead against the cold window frame. He thought, all right then, let us start differently. He thought about what he knew. Everything, the second prince's plan assembled in his memory like a building he had walked through after it had already collapsed. Understanding the architecture from the ruins. Haun's placement, the rebel accusation, the military campaign designed to end in his death. The second prince's faction, his mother's family, the political machinery that had been running underground for a decade. He knew all of it. Every piece, every name, every pressure point. He thought, I am a dead man who woke up with all his enemies' plans in his head. He thought, I should use that. He straightened. He crossed to his writing table and sat down and picked up his ink brush and held it without writing anything for a long moment. He thought, she is out there, somewhere in this city. She is 19 years old and she does not know that she is going to be crown princess. She does not know that in 4 months she will walk into a selection ceremony and be chosen. She does not know that in a year she will be protecting a man who does not deserve it. She does not know that in 2 years she will follow that man to a battlefield in a soldier's disguise and tell him they will live together or die together. He thought, she does not know she already died for me. He thought, she is not going to die for me again. He set the brush against the paper and began to write. Not a letter, a list. Every name he remembered, every connection. Every move in the sequence that the second prince had built. Every piece of the machinery, written down, organized, dated as best as he could estimate, with the particular clarity of someone who is not working from suspicion but from memory. He wrote until his hand ached. Then he rolled the paper tight, sealed it inside a second document of administrative routine, and locked it in the bottom drawer of his writing desk. He thought, the second prince thinks he has years to build this. He thinks the crown princess selection is 4 months away and the rebel accusation is 18 months after that and the military campaign is 6 months after that. He thinks he has time. He thought he does not have time, because I am not going to wait. He thought, but I cannot move too fast. If I dismantle the machinery before it is fully visible, he rebuilds it. If I expose him too early, his mother's family circles the wagons and disappears every piece of evidence, and I am left with accusations I cannot prove. I need to let the plan develop far enough to be legible, far enough to trace, not far enough to kill anyone. He thought, this is going to require a kind of patience that does not come naturally to me. He thought, good. Things that do not come naturally are worth practicing. He picked up the brush again and began his morning's official work. In 3 hours he had a court session. In 6 hours he had a training session. In the evening he had a meeting with his secretary about the northern provincial accounts. And somewhere in between all of that, he had to find a way to begin pulling the thread of a conspiracy without anyone knowing he was pulling it. He thought, I have done harder things. He thought, no, actually I have not. But I am going to do this one anyway. He had known Ha-un before the selection ceremony. This was the thing he had not understood in the first life, because in the first life he had been a man moving inside a story without knowing it was a story. He had met her and called it coincidence and called it fate and called it love and never once asked the simplest question. Why here, why now, why this particular woman in this particular place at this particular moment in his life? In this life, with the memory of a different ending sitting inside his chest, he asked all three. And the answers rearranged what he thought he knew about everything. He had met Ha-un at a calligraphy review, a formal obligation that took him to a minor noble house where he was expected to assess the quality of their scholarly instruction. Standard court business. Unremarkable on paper. Except that he remembered, now, that the invitation to that particular house had come through an unusual channel. Not from the house directly but from a junior official in the Ministry of Rights who had recommended the visit as part of a broader cultural review program. A junior official whose appointment he now remembered tracing in the first life to a family with connections to. He stopped. He pulled the thought out carefully, like a thread from tight weave. The junior official. His appointment. The family. The connections. The second prince's household staff. He sat with that for a moment. Then he did something that the version of him from the first life would not have done. He went to the meeting anyway. Not because he did not know what it was. Because he needed to understand what it was from the inside. Ha-un was in the garden when he arrived. He had come ahead of his retinue, deliberately, the way he sometimes did, finding it useful to see places before the formal performance began. She was arranging brushes on a low outdoor table, her back partially to him, and she did not hear him approach because the garden had the soft acoustics of moving water somewhere nearby. He stood for a moment and looked at her. He had been bracing for this. Had thought, in the days since waking up, about what it would feel like to see her, whether the echo of what he had felt in the first life would rise in him, whether the body remembered things the mind had tried to refile as evidence rather than emotion. The answer was yes. The echo was there. Not love, not anymore, not now that he knew what he knew, but something that had lived near love and still occupied that space. The ghost of something. He noted it, acknowledged it, and set it aside the way you set aside a tool you are not using right now. He said, "You arrange brushes like you are planning a campaign." She turned. Her face did the thing he remembered, the quick assessment, the warmth arriving just behind it, the specific quality of attention that made whoever she was looking at feel like the most interesting person in the room. He had fallen for that quality completely in the first life. He understood now that it was a skill, and that skills could be learned for any number of reasons, and that the reasons mattered more than the skill itself. She said, "Your Highness." A small bow, composed, not flustered. "I did not hear you arrive." He said, "I was quiet." She said, "I see that." She looked at the brushes, then back at him. "Have you been waiting long?" He said, "No. I was watching you work." Something moved in her expression. Not calculation exactly, something more layered than that. A woman deciding how much of a real response to give. She said, I find the arrangement of tools before work to be clarifying. It settles the mind. He said, I understand that. She looked at him with an expression he recognized from the first life as the one that meant she was genuinely curious rather than performing curiosity. He had not known before that there was a difference. He knew now. He said, What do you enjoy most about this work? She said, That is an unusual question for a formal review. He said, I ask unusual questions. She considered this. Then, the permanence of it. Ink on paper. Once it dries, it does not change its mind. A pause. I find that reassuring. He said, Things that do not change their minds. She said, Yes. He thought, because everything else in your life has changed its mind about you. Your safety, your identity, your family, the truth about how your mother died. Everything that was supposed to be permanent turned out to be paper, and not the ink-dried kind. He said, That sounds like something you learned from experience. She went very still for exactly one breath. Then she said, Most things worth knowing come from experience. He said, Yes. They looked at each other for a moment. He thought, You are deciding whether I am safe. You are doing the calculation, is he someone I can let see something real, or do I perform the warmth and keep the real thing locked away? He thought, You have been making that calculation with every person you have met since the second prince's household took you in and gave you a role and told you what your survival required. He said, I should not keep you from your preparation. Shall we begin? She said, Yes, of course. They conducted the formal review. She was exceptional, genuinely, not performatively. He noted this with the attention he was now applying to everything about her. The skill was real. The knowledge was real. The intelligence that moved through her assessments of the work samples was not manufactured. Whatever she had been made into, she had also made herself into something. He thought, That matters. That has to mean something about what is still possible. He began the formal investigation 3 days after meeting Haun. Not with palace intelligence officers. He could not use official channels without the second prince's network noticing the inquiry within a week. He used something older and less visible, personal relationships. Men who owed him favors not politically but personally. A court scholar he had helped quietly during a difficult situation 2 years before. A records keeper in the palace archive who had a brother Jonghyun had once intervened for during a minor legal matter. He asked small questions. Separately, days apart, through channels that would look like unconnected curiosity if anyone was watching. He was looking for Lady Jang. He had remembered the name in the blur of memories from the first life, had caught it in the fragment of a sealed record that the crown princess had found and brought to him in a late-night working session, and which he had processed in the way you process things when you are dying. Partially, urgently, with the understanding that you will not have time to finish the thought. He had time now. Lady Jang, a concubine of the king, charged with treason approximately 14 years prior, executed with her children. He found the sealed record on the 9th day of his search. He sat in the palace archive in the late afternoon with the record in his hands and read it in full, and what he found rearranged the geometry of everything he thought he understood. Lady Jang had not been a conspirator. The investigation that had found her guilty had been conducted in 48 hours. Barely enough time to examine evidence. Far less enough to verify sources. The witnesses who had testified against her were 3 in number, all connected to the same faction in the outer court, all with documented relationships to the same senior minister who had, in the years after Lady Jang's execution, risen significantly in influence. A minister from a family that had been, at the time, closely allied with the faction supporting Lee Jeongyin's own mother. He read this twice. He thought, Lady Jang was a rival. Not a threat. Not a genuine political threat, but a rival in the specific and petty way that matters inside palace walls, where the king's attention and the king's favor are the currency everything else is purchased with. And someone in his mother's allied faction had decided to remove the rival. He thought, they framed her for treason. They manufactured witnesses. They conducted an investigation so fast that no counter-evidence could be assembled. And then they executed her. He thought. And her children. He looked at the execution record. 3 children. 2 sons and a daughter. He looked at the daughter's recorded age at time of execution. He did the arithmetic. He set the record down on the table and stared at the far wall of the archive for a long time. He thought, Haun. She would have been 5 years old. 5 years old, and the palace execution order had covered her name on a document, and someone, the second prince's household or his father or an associate of both, had looked at a 5-year-old girl and seen something useful. An instrument of future leverage. A debt owed that could be collected later with interest, in the form of a specific service rendered in a specific direction. He thought. They saved a 5-year-old girl from an execution that was itself built on a lie. And then they raised her knowing she owed them her life. And then when the time was right they told her what she owed, and what her mother had suffered, and they gave her a target and they handed her a role. He thought. She was 5 years old. He closed the record. He sat very still for a moment. Then he stood, replaced the record exactly as he had found it, and walked out of the archive into the late afternoon air. He stood in the courtyard and breathed. He thought. She is not the second prince's creature. Not really. She is a woman who survived something unsurvivable, and who was raised on the specific grief of a murdered mother, and who was handed a story about justice that was actually a story about someone else's ambition. She thinks she is choosing revenge. She is actually being used as a key in a lock, and when the door opens she is not going to be on the right side of it. He thought. The second prince does not care about Lady Jiang. He does not care about Haun's grief. He cares about the throne. He will use her grief like fuel, burn it for light and heat and forward motion, and when it runs out, he will discard what is left of her without looking back. He thought. I cannot let that happen. He thought. But I cannot move openly. Not yet. If I go to Haun now and say I know what you are and I know why and I know the second prince is using you, she will either not believe me or she will warn him, or she will make a decision out of fear that closes every door I am trying to keep open. He needed to know more. He needed to know exactly how much she understood about what she was part of. He needed to know whether she knew the full shape of the plan, the rebel accusation, the military campaign, the intended death, or whether she thought she was simply feeding intelligence about the crown prince's movements and did not understand what that intelligence was being used to build. He needed to talk to her again. Not as a formal meeting, as a friend. Stop right here and think about what he just decided. He is going to maintain a friendship with a woman who is embedded in the plan to destroy him. Not because he is naive, he knows exactly what she is, but because he needs to understand the full shape of what she knows before he can figure out how to pull her out of it without burning everything down. That is not weakness. That is the most cold-blooded kind of compassion. Keeping someone close because you understand them well enough to see they are drowning, even as they are swimming toward you with the intention of pulling you under. Comment right now. Do you trust him to handle Haun correctly? Or is this going to be the mistake that breaks everything? Subscribe if you have not already. You do not want to miss what comes next. He saw Haun 4 more times before the selection ceremony. Each time, he engineered the meeting to appear organic. A second formal visit to the noble house on administrative business. A chance encounter at a scholarly exhibition he had arranged to attend. A morning at a temple where she had gone with other women from the household and he happened, with exquisite timing, to be conducting a ceremonial obligation. He was not proud of the engineering, but he was not ashamed of it either. He was building something that required a foundation, and the foundation required time and repetition and the accumulation of small, genuine moments. Because the moments were genuine. That was the uncomfortable part. When she was not performing, when she let the warmth drop slightly and spoke from a place that was less managed, genuinely interesting. She knew things he did not know. She had read widely, in the years of her hidden life, with the intensity of someone who does not have much else and makes books fill the space that safety should occupy. She had opinions about historical governance that were surprisingly sharp. She had a sense of humor that was dry and quick and that surprised him every time it appeared, because it was not the warmth she deployed in calculated doses. It was something faster and more unguarded. He let himself enjoy the genuine parts. He thought, she deserves to be seen as a full person. Whatever she is part of, she is also this. Someone who reads history obsessively and has strong opinions about the failures of the Goryeo administrative system and laughs quickly when something actually strikes her as funny. On the fourth meeting, she said something that changed the shape of his investigation. They were at the scholarly exhibition, standing in front of a display of old court documents, and she said, quietly, looking at the documents rather than at him, "Do you believe that official records ever tell the full truth?" He said, "Almost never." She said, "But people treat them as if they do." He said, "Because the alternative, acknowledging that records can be fabricated, is frightening. It means nothing official can be trusted. People prefer the comfort of the record." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "My mother kept her own records, private ones. She believed that if something true was ever going to survive, it could not rely on official channels." She stopped. Something shifted in her face, a recognition that she had said more than she intended. He said very carefully, "That sounds like a wise woman." She looked at him. The warmth was entirely gone. What was there instead was something raw and old and tired in a way that a young woman's face should not be tired. She said, "She was." He said, "I am sorry." Past tense suggests, "I am sorry." She looked back at the documents. "It was a long time ago." He said, "Loss does not care how long ago it was." She said nothing for a moment. Then, "No, it does not." He thought, she knows. She knows her mother's records exist, that her mother kept her own documentation of what was true, which means somewhere, possibly, there is counter-evidence to the charges that killed Lady Jiang. Evidence that Haun either has or is trying to find. Evidence that would be devastating if it surfaced in the right place at the right time. Not to him, but to the faction that built the original lie. He thought, that is what she actually wants. Not to destroy me, to surface the truth about her mother. The second prince has made her believe that destroying me is the path to that truth. That weakening the crown prince's faction will weaken the people who killed her mother enough that the truth can come out. He thought, she is wrong. Destroying me does not surface the truth. It just gives the second prince the throne. And a man who has the throne has no reason to let any dangerous truths come out about anything. He thought, I need to find those records before the second prince does. He said, "You have very thoughtful eyes when you look at old documents." She looked at him again. The rawness was covered now, the warmth was back, but differently layered than usual. Like she was using it to cover something real rather than to replace it. She said, "I have very suspicious eyes, Your Highness." That is not the same thing. He thought, no, it is not. And that is exactly why you are so dangerous. Because the suspicion and the grief are real, and real things are harder to counter than manufactured ones. He said, "I hope the next time we meet, you will tell me more about your mother." She looked at him for a long moment. She said, "Perhaps." The second prince made his move 12 days before the selection ceremony. Yi Jonghyun had been expecting it. In the first life, Yi Jonghyun had been content to let the selection proceed without interference, trusting that Haun was in position and the plan would run on its design track. But in this life, and Yi Jonghyun had been watching for exactly this, something had changed. His brother had noticed that the crown prince was more alert, more engaged, moving through the court with an intentionality that had not been there before. He could not know what had changed, but he could see that something had, and so he moved early. He submitted a formal request to the king through the Bureau of Royal Marriage Affairs. The request was framed with elegant procedural correctness, citing the stability of the court, the political wisdom of diversifying royal alliances, the historical precedent for secondary princes making marriage arrangements that strengthened the throne's political base. He requested Lady Yoon Jak-young. The document landed on the king's desk on a Tuesday morning. Yi Jonghyun had it in his hands by Tuesday afternoon. He read it once, set it down, picked it up and read it again. Then he went to see his brother. Yi Jonghyun was in his private study when Yi Jonghyun arrived unannounced. The second prince looked up from his desk with an expression that was, for a fraction of a second, something other than composed. Then the composure slid back into place like a door closing. He said, "Hyung Nim, this is unexpected." Lee Jong-hyun sat across from him without being invited to sit. He said, "I have read your marriage request." Lee Jong-hyun said, "That was efficient. I submitted it this morning. I read it this afternoon. I want to discuss it with you directly." "Of course." Lee Jong-hyun folded his hands on the desk. He was 21, 1 year younger, with a face that had always reminded Lee Jong-hyun of a court official's seal. Precise, formal, leaving an impression without revealing what pressed it into place. "I hope you understand that the request is made in the interest of court stability, not." Lee Jong-hyun said, "Stop." Lee Jong-hyun stopped. Lee Jong-hyun said, "Not that version. The real one." A pause. Something moved behind his brother's eyes. Not fear. His brother did not fear him, which was part of the problem. Recalculation. The particular look of a chess player encountering an unexpected move. He said, "I am not sure what you mean." Lee Jong-hyun said, "You have been building a political base for 3 years. Your mother's family, the Choi faction, has been positioning itself in the outer court with patient, systematic precision. I have been watching it." This was partly true. He had not been watching it in the first life, but he had watched the reconstruction of it in the second, and the pattern was legible once you knew what to look for. Lady Yoon's father controls approximately a third of the court's senior appointments. If you marry her, you absorb that network. You make yourself into a political force that is no longer secondary in any real sense. Lee Jong-hyun was very still. Lee Jong-hyun continued, "I am not going to let you do that." Lee Jong-hyun said, "The selection has not. The selection will produce Lady Yoon as crown princess. She is the strongest candidate and the bureau knows it. And she is going to marry me." He said it plainly, not as a desire, as a fact, stated in advance of its occurrence. "You are going to withdraw your request before father has to decline it formally. Not because I am asking you to, because if you force father to decline it, the reason for the decline will have to be documented, and the documentation will have to reference what the real purpose of the request was, and that documentation will go into the official record." Lee Jong-hyun said, "There is nothing improper about a prince requesting." "The request to marry the crown princess candidate," Lee Jong-hyun said, "made 12 days before the selection ceremony that would formally designate her, is improper. It is an attempt to preempt a royal selection process that the king has sanctioned. Father will not tolerate that. He has never tolerated interference in royal process." A pause. "You know this. You submitted the request anyway, which tells me you calculated that father might overlook the impropriety if the political argument was strong enough." He looked at his brother steadily. "The political argument is not strong enough." Lee Jong-hyun looked at him for a long moment. He said, "You have given this considerable thought." Lee Jong-hyun said, "I give everything considerable thought." Lee Jong-hyun said, "May I ask, what changed? 6 months ago you seemed resigned to the selection's outcome, whatever it was. You showed very little interest." Lee Jong-hyun thought, "Because 6 months ago I was a man who was carrying a private grief so heavy I could barely see past it. And then I died, and then I woke up, and grief has a way of clarifying your priorities when it has already cost you everything once." He said, "People change." Lee Jong-hyun said, "That is not an answer." Lee Jong-hyun said, "Jungyeona." He used the intimate form deliberately, the brotherly form, the one that had meant something real once. He watched his brother's expression shift slightly when he heard it. "Withdraw the request. Let the selection proceed. There will be other political alliances, other marriages, other paths to the influence you want. This is not the one." Lee Jong-hyun looked at him. He said, "You say that as if you believe I would listen." Lee Jong-hyun said, "I say it because you are my brother, and I am giving you the option to do this cleanly. That option will not exist indefinitely." Silence. Lee Jong-hyun said, very carefully, "Is that a warning?" Lee Jong-hyun said, "It is a fact, presented in advance of its becoming relevant." He stood. He straightened his robes. He said, "Enjoy your evening." He walked out. In the corridor, he kept his pace steady and his face composed, and he did not let himself feel the full weight of what that conversation had been until he turned the corner and there was no one watching. He stood still for a moment. He thought, "You looked at me and you did not see someone who remembers. You saw someone who changed. You do not know why, which means you are going to spend the next several weeks trying to understand the why, and while you are trying to understand it, you are going to be less operational. That is 3 weeks I can use." He thought, "You are my brother. I grew up beside you. I trusted you completely and you used that trust as infrastructure. And I am standing in a corridor that still smells like palace incense, and I am using the affectionate form of your name as a strategic tool, and I do not know how I feel about that." He thought, "I feel whatever I need to feel about it later. Right now there is work." He pushed off the wall. He went to find the king. His father received him in the informal receiving room, the one that meant the conversation would not be officially recorded. This was either a good sign or a complicated one. With his father, it was usually both. The king was a man of 62 who wore his age the way old swords wear use, not as deterioration but as evidence of work done. He looked at Yi Jonghyun when he entered with eyes that were still precise under everything else. He said, "You heard about your brother's request." Yi Jonghyun said, "I did." Quickly, "I have been paying attention." The king looked at him. That particular look, the one that meant he was revising a calculation he had been carrying for a while. "You have changed. Is that a concern?" "It is an observation." A pause. "Sit down." He sat. The king said, "Your brother's request will be declined. That was decided before you arrived. The selection process is sanctioned and it will proceed without interference." He looked at Yi Jonghyun. "That is not why you are here." Yi Jonghyun said, "No. I am here to speak plainly about the selection." "Speak then." Yi Jonghyun said, "Lady Yoon Jakyung, I want the selection to produce her as crown princess. Not because I am arranging the outcome. I am not asking you to rig a selection. I am asking you to let it run correctly. She is the strongest candidate by any honest measure. If the process is allowed to run without interference, she will be chosen on merit." The king said, "And if I ask why you have developed this particular interest?" Yi Jonghyun said, "Because she is capable enough to help me protect the throne. And because your second son just tried to claim her before the process had run, which tells you everything you need to know about how valuable she actually is to the people who understand the court." The king was quiet for a moment. He said, "Your brother claims the court stability argument." Yi Jonghyun said, "My brother claims whatever argument moves the piece he wants moved. He wants her because her father controls the appointments that control the court. He wants her for the same reason you should want her as my crown princess, because Minister Yoon's network is the most significant political force in the outer court, and whoever has access to that network has the stability to actually govern." The king looked at him. "You are arguing for a marriage on purely political grounds." Yi Jonghyun said, "I am arguing for it on every ground available to me. Political is the one that fits in a formal conversation with my father." Something moved in the king's expression. Almost humor, almost surprise. The look of a man who is hearing something from his son that he had not budgeted for. He said, "The selection will proceed as planned. Lady Yoon's candidacy will not be interfered with." Yi Jonghyun said, "Thank you." The king said, "You may thank me by not making me regret this level of confidence in your judgment." Yi Jonghyun said, "I will do my best." He left. He walked back through the palace corridors and thought, Round 1. The second prince's request is dead. The selection runs clean. She will be chosen, and it will be chosen correctly, and it will not be something anyone can challenge on procedural grounds because every step of it will be correctly documented. He thought, now the harder part. He thought, she is going to fight this. She was fighting it already. He knew this not because he was watching her directly. He had no legitimate reason to observe a selection candidate before the formal process, but because the Bureau of Rights had submitted a quietly desperate administrative memo requesting guidance on how to handle multiple formal procedural objections submitted by a single candidate. He read the memo. He read the 3 objections. He sat back in his chair. He thought, she is meticulous. Every objection is procedurally airtight. Each one raises a genuine issue that requires a formal response before the process can advance. She has essentially built a legal scaffolding around the path to the ceremony that requires the Bureau to take it down one piece at a time. He thought, this is not someone who does not want to be crown princess. This is someone who knows that the path leads somewhere that will cost her and is trying to understand the cost before she commits to it. He thought, she has been told by her father that she does not have a choice, and she is responding to that the way she responds to everything, by finding the exact dimensions of the cage she is in. He thought, I should let her. This was his first instinct, and he examined it carefully because first instincts in complex situations were not always right. She needed to understand the shape of the system she was entering. She needed to learn how the Bureau operated, how formal channels worked, how resistance played out against institutional momentum. She was learning all of this from the inside of the fight she was already in. If he intervened, if he smoothed the path or removed the obstacles, he would rob her of that learning. And she was going to need it. Everything he knew about what was coming required her to be someone who understood exactly how the court operated from the inside out. Not from theory, from experience. He thought, let her fight. Let her learn the shape of the resistance. He thought, but do not let the Bureau dismiss her concerns as if they are not real. Because they are real. They are procedurally valid. They deserve proper responses. He sent a note to the Bureau, carefully worded, officially neutral, requesting that each objection receive full formal documentation in its response. Nothing more, nothing less. He thought, I am doing the smallest possible thing that keeps her fighting in a direction that is also teaching her something. He thought, she would be furious if she knew I existed in relation to this process at all. He thought, good. Keep that energy. You are going to need it. He went back to Haun one more time before the selection. This was a risk. He knew it was a risk. The second prince's network would be watching her interactions, cataloging them, and multiple informal meetings between the crown prince and a woman who was supposed to be a chance encounter were exactly the kind of data point that triggered recalibration in careful operatives. He went anyway. Because the thing Haun had said about her mother's records was sitting in his chest like a stone, he could not stop pressing on. He arranged to cross paths with her at a tea house that functioned as neutral ground for exactly the kind of conversation he needed to have. Public enough to be undramatic, quiet enough to be real. She arrived 3 minutes after him. She sat down across the low table with the composed efficiency of someone who had received his message and spent the intervening time deciding whether to come. She had come. That told him something. He said, you came. She said, you asked. He said, I was not sure that would be sufficient. She said, I was not sure either. She folded her hands on the table. She looked at him with the expression he had learned to recognize as her real face. Not warm, not performed, just watchful and tired and more intelligent than most people she encountered gave her credit for. Your Highness, what is it you actually want? He said, I want to talk about your mother. She went very still. He said, not what you have been told to tell. Not the official version. I want to know what you know. She said after a long pause, that is a very dangerous question. He said, I know. She said, why would you ask it? He said, because I found a sealed record in the palace archive. And because what is in that record does not match the official account of what happened to Lady Jiang. And because I think you have known for a long time that it does not match. And I think you have been doing something about that in a direction that is going to get you hurt. She looked at him. He thought, this is the moment. Either she trusts me enough to tell me something real, or she stands up and leaves and reports this conversation to the second prince and everything accelerates in the worst possible direction. He waited. She said, very quietly, how much do you know? He said, enough to understand the shape of what was done to her. Not enough to know what you have found. She said, you found the execution record. He said, yes. She said, and you noticed the investigation was conducted in 48 hours. He said, yes. She said, and you traced the witnesses. He said, yes. She looked at her hands. She said, my mother kept a record, a private journal. She encoded it, disguised it as a household accounts ledger. She gave it to a woman she trusted before. She stopped. Breathed. Before. The woman kept it. Hidden. For 11 years she kept it. She looked up. I have it now. He said. What does it contain? She said. The names of the people who framed her. The dates of their meetings. The specific arrangement they made, what they offered and to whom, what testimony they purchased, and who authorized the final order. She held his gaze. Everything. He sat with this for a moment. He thought. She has the evidence. She has had it. The second prince knows she has it. That is why she is valuable to him. Not just as intelligence about the crown prince. As a potential weapon of enormous destructive power, which he intends to use at the moment that serves him best, regardless of what it does to Haun afterward. He thought. She thinks she is using him. She thinks the second prince is her tool, that she is feeding him information about me in exchange for his help in surfacing the truth about her mother. She thinks the arrangement is mutual. He thought. It is not mutual. It is never mutual with him. He said. Do you trust the second prince? She looked at him. Something moved in her face. Not anger. Something more complicated. The look of a woman who has asked herself this question before and arrived at an answer she did not like. She said. I trust that he wants what he says he wants. He said. Which is? She said. To see the Yun faction diminished. To see the people who built the lie that killed my mother held accountable. He said. And you believe that removing me from the throne achieves that? She was very still. He said. Hauna. The intimate address, not romantic, but the address of someone who sees her, who has been paying attention and is not going to pretend otherwise. Weakening me does not expose the people who killed your mother. It gives the second prince what he actually wants. And the people who killed your mother, the ones who are still alive, the ones still protected by their positions, they are not in my camp. They are in the camp that your benefactor has been careful not to threaten. She said. That is not. He said. Where are the names in your mother's record? Which faction? Which families? Silence. He said. You know the names. I saw your face when you mentioned the Yun faction last time we spoke. You were watching for my reaction because you believe, or you have been told, that Minister Yun's people are responsible. He paused. But the Yun faction was not fully consolidated 14 years ago. Your mother died 14 years ago. The people who had access to the Palace Investigation Bureau at that time, the people with enough leverage to purchase testimony and fast-track an execution. Let me tell you what the court looked like 14 years ago, and you tell me if the names in your mother's record match what I describe. She looked at him. He told her. He went through the political configuration of the court 14 years ago, the faction alignments, the family networks, the specific officials who had controlled the investigation bureau and the execution orders. He had read enough historical court records in the weeks of his investigation to have a clear picture. She listened. As he spoke, her expression changed. Not all at once. Gradually, the way light changes in a room when a cloud moves, you do not see the moment of change, only the result. When he finished, she said, The names in my mother's record. He waited. She said, Some of them match, but not the Yun family. She said it slowly, like she was discovering it as she said it. The Choi family, and the Im family, and a minister named. She stopped. He said, The Choi family. She said, Yes. He said, The second prince's mother's family. The silence that followed was the loudest thing he had heard since waking up in this body. She looked at him. He looked back. He said, He told you the Yun faction killed your mother. She said, her voice very flat. Yes. He said. He knew that was a lie. She said nothing. He said, He has been using your mother's death as leverage to point you in a direction that serves him. He did not tell you the truth about who killed her because the truth leads back to his own family. He said it plainly, without drama, because the situation already contained enough of its own drama. Ayuna, you have been looking for justice in entirely the wrong place. And he made sure of that. She sat very still. He said nothing. He let it sit. He let it land and be real and did not try to manage what it did to her face or her hands or the particular quality of stillness that was not composure but something underneath composure, at the structural level, deciding whether to hold. She said, "If what you are saying is true," he said, "check the names. Against your mother's record. You will find what I am saying is true." She said, "If it is true." She looked at him. Her eyes were dry and very bright and full of something that was not going to become tears here, in this tea house, in front of him, and he respected her for that even as he understood what it was costing her. "Then everything I have done, everything I gave them, everything I—" She stopped. He said, "Not everything. You survived. You kept your mother's record. You kept looking for the truth, even when you were handed a false version of it. Those are not small things." She said, "I gave them information about you." He said, "Yes." She said, "And you are—" She stopped again, looked at him with an expression he could not fully name. "Why are you telling me this? If I go back to them and report this conversation," he said, "then you do. I cannot control that. But I do not think you are going to." She said, "Why not?" He said, "Because you just found out that the people who housed you and fed you and gave you a purpose for 11 years are the same people who killed your mother. And whatever you do with that, whatever direction it sends you in, I do not think that direction is toward them." She looked at him for a long, long moment. Then she stood. She bowed formally, with the composure of someone who has decided they will not fall apart until they are alone. She said, "I need to think." He said, "I know." She said, Do not do anything until I—" He said, "I will not move on any of this without speaking to you first. You have my word." She looked at him once more. Then she left. He sat at the table with his tea going cold in front of him and thought, "I have just told a woman who has been operating against me that her entire framework for the last 11 years was built on a lie. I have given her information that could either pull her out of the second prince's orbit entirely or send her into it more desperately out of shock and disorientation. I cannot know which one it will be. I have to wait and see." He thought. She was 5 years old, and no one has told her the truth about her own life until today. He thought, I hope it is enough. The selection ceremony happened on a Tuesday. He was not present. Protocol did not allow it, and he had decided, this time, not to engineer his way into proximity. He had done what he could do, ensured the process ran cleanly, ensured the second prince's interference was blocked, ensured that Lady Yoon's procedural objections received full formal responses that were documented in the record. He waited in his study. His secretary brought him the result in the late afternoon. He read it, set it down, sat back. Lady Yeon Yakyung. Selected. He thought, of course she was. He thought, now the harder part begins. He thought, she is going to fight this harder than the selection. Because the selection was an institutional process she could object to through institutional channels. The marriage is a direct order from her father, backed by the king's formal endorsement, and there is no procedural scaffolding that can hold it back indefinitely. He thought, she is going to be furious. She is going to try every available lever. She is going to be trapped. He thought, and I cannot rescue her from the trap, because the trap is also the thing that keeps her safe. Because if she is inside the palace as crown princess, I can protect her. If she is outside it, if she manages to get herself removed from consideration, if her father backs down, if the marriage falls through, then she is exposed. She is a high-profile candidate who was passed over, daughter of a politically significant minister, known to the second prince as someone who would have been formidable. She becomes a target. He thought, the palace is not safe, but it is safer than the alternative. He thought, I need to tell her that. He thought, she will not want to hear it from me. He thought, she is going to have to hear it anyway. He requested a meeting with Minister Yoon. This was unusual enough to cause a ripple in the official schedule. Crown princes did not typically request private audiences with the fathers of their selected crown princesses before the formal acceptance was complete. It was improper in a minor but noticeable way. He did not care. Minister Yoon Tae-jun was a man who had spent 20 years in the outer court and whose face showed nothing he had not decided to show. He sat across from Lee Jong-hyun with the composed deference of someone who understood the hierarchy and also understood, beneath it, that in this particular room, he held a specific kind of leverage. He said, "Your Highness, this is unexpected." Lee Jong-hyun said, "I will be direct." Minister Yoon said, "Please." Lee Jong-hyun said, "Your daughter is fighting the selection outcome. She has been fighting it since before the ceremony. I am aware of the objections and I am aware that they will eventually exhaust themselves against the institutional process. But I wanted to speak with you directly about the nature of the resistance, rather than waiting for it to resolve on its own." Minister Yoon said, "My daughter's reservations are..." Lee Jong-hyun said, "Her reservations are understandable. The selection was not her choice. The marriage is not her choice. She has been handled in a way that removes agency from someone who has a great deal of it, and people with a great deal of agency do not respond well to having it removed." He held the minister's eyes. "I am not here to ask you to force her. I am here to ask you to explain something to her that she may not have been told directly." The minister said, "And what is that?" Lee Jong-hyun said, "That the second prince submitted a formal request for her before the selection. That the request was declined. That the reason it was declined is that I went to my father and argued against it." He paused. "She should understand that she had two possible outcomes from the selection, and one of them was significantly worse for her than the one she received." The minister looked at him. Something shifted in his expression. The first thing Lee Jong-hyun had seen that was not managed. A reassessment. Rapid and thorough. He said, "You are telling me this because you want her to understand the political reality before she refuses it." Lee Jong-hyun said, "I am telling you this because she deserves accurate information about her own situation. What she does with that information is her choice." The minister said, "You are giving my daughter a choice." Lee Jong-hyun said, "I am giving her accurate data. The choice was always hers. You took it from her. I am returning a part of it." The minister stared at him.
Lee Weong-gyun stood.
He said, "I would appreciate it if she heard this from you rather than from me. A crown princess who resents her crown prince from the first day of their acquaintance is a political liability neither of us can afford. I would rather she enter this marriage, if she enters it, with clear eyes." He left. He did not hear from Ha-eun for 11 days. He had not expected to hear quickly. What he had told her required time to process. Not emotionally, though that was its own thing, but practically. She would check the names. She would go back through the records she had been carrying for years and map them against the new information and see whether the shape changed. That was a process that took time and required privacy and could not be rushed. He waited. He used the 11 days. He continued pulling the thread of the second prince's conspiracy. Not the Ha-eun piece, which he was handling separately, but the wider machinery. The rebel accusation that was being built. He had identified, through his investigation, 3 officials who were part of the fabrication network, people who would eventually be called as sources for the manufactured evidence. He did not confront them. He cataloged them. He documented their movements and their connections, and he built, in the locked bottom drawer of his desk, a counter-record that was growing thicker every week. He thought, "I cannot stop the accusation entirely. Not without revealing that I know it is coming, which reveals how I know it is coming, which is a conversation I am not ready to have with anyone. I can prepare the ground around it, make it land less cleanly, make the counter-evidence already visible before the accusation is filed, so that when it arrives, the response is ready rather than reactive." He thought, 14 months. I have approximately 14 months before the accusation is filed. In 14 months, I need to have built enough visible, documented, undeniable evidence of my loyalty and my governance competence that the accusation cannot find purchase. He thought, that is a lot of governance. He thought, good, start governing. Ha-eun came to him on the 12th day. Not through an engineered meeting. She sent a formal message through proper channels, a request for an audience on a matter of calligraphy documentation, which was their established cover, and he received her in the same formal reception room with his secretary present. She walked in with the particular composure of someone who has been through something large and has decided how to carry it. She sat. She set nothing on the table between them. She looked at him. She said, "The names match." He said, "I know." She said, "The Choi family, his mother's family. They are the ones who orchestrated it." She said it flatly, like a fact she was reading from a document rather than something that had cost her 11 days of reckoning. "My mother was removed because she had the king's attention, and the Choi family wanted that attention for their own candidate. The second prince's mother." She paused. "His mother benefited directly from my mother's death." He said, "Yes." She said, "And he knew this." He said, "He has always known this. He grew up knowing it." She said, "He told me the Yoon family was responsible." He said, "Yes." She said, "He pointed me at you." He said, "Yes." She looked at her hands, then at him. She said, "What do you want from me?" He said, "Nothing that damages you. I want the record, your mother's record. Not to keep. To submit through the proper channels at the right moment, with proper protections in place so that it cannot be seized or destroyed before it is read." He held her eyes. "Your mother deserves to have her name cleared. That is possible. Not immediately, not easily, but possible. And when it happens, it needs to happen in a way that is documented and permanent and that cannot be buried again by anyone with enough power to bury things." She said, "You want to use it against the second prince." He said, "I want to use it to tell the truth. What that does to the second prince is a consequence, not a goal." She looked at him for a long time. She said, "Why should I believe that you are different from him? You are both princes. You both want the throne. You both. Everyone in this palace uses people." He said, "Yes." She blinked. She had not expected agreement. He said, "Everyone in this palace uses people. I am using you right now, in the sense that what I am asking for serves my interests as well as yours. I am not pretending otherwise." He leaned forward slightly. "The difference is that what I am asking for actually serves your interest. What he asked for did not. He gave you a false target and told you aiming at it was justice. I am asking you to aim at the real one." A pause. "You can verify everything I have told you. The names, the dates, the faction structure. Everything I said is in the records. I am not asking you to trust me. I am asking you to check." She said, "I already checked." He said, "I know." She said, "Your Highness." She looked at him with an expression that was the most unguarded thing he had seen from her. Not warm, not performed, just tired and real, and something underneath the tiredness that might, in a very long time, become something like relief. "I do not know how to do this. I have been doing something very specific for 11 years, and it turns out that specific thing was wrong. I do not know what the next move is." He said, "The next move is, do nothing. Not yet. Do not contact the second prince. Do not contact anyone in his network. Continue exactly as you have been, appearing to be in your normal position, and wait for me to tell you when the time is right to move." She said, "You are asking me to go back to them." He said, "For a while, yes." She said, "That is very uncomfortable." He said, "I know. I am sorry for that. It is the safest option for you right now. If you disappear from their view suddenly, they will suspect you have been compromised. That puts you in danger." She said, "And if I agree to this, if I wait, if I keep appearing to cooperate, and then the right moment comes, what happens to me? What is my position then?" He said, "You are the daughter of Lady Jiang. Your mother's name is cleared. Your testimony about the second prince's activities, along with your mother's record, becomes part of the official evidence in a formal investigation. You are a witness, not a conspirator. And whatever your testimony costs the people it implicates." He paused. "That is justice. The kind your mother's record was always meant to enable." She was quiet for a very long time. She said, "All right." He said, "All right." She said, "I will wait. I will continue as I am. And when you say it is time, I will tell you everything." He said, "Thank you." She said, "Do not thank me yet. I might change my mind." He said, "If you do, come and tell me directly. Do not go back to them. She stood. She bowed. She was at the door when he said, Ayuna. She stopped. Did not turn. He said, Your mother's record. Keep it safe. A pause. She said, I always have. She left. He was halfway through eating dinner when his private messenger arrived with something unexpected. A letter.
Formal seal.
From the Bureau of Rights. He opened it. Lady Yoon Jak-young had withdrawn her final procedural objection. He read it twice, set it down, picked up his chopsticks, set them down too. He thought. She agreed. He thought. Her father must have told her about the second prince's request, about his being declined, about the alternative that was blocked. He thought. She did not agree because she wants this. She agreed because she understood the shape of her situation accurately and decided that a cage she can operate inside is better than an exposure she cannot survive. He thought. That is not the same as wanting it. He thought, I know. He thought, I need to give her reasons. Not now, not today. The formal processes had to run their course and the wedding preparation period would take months. And there was no appropriate channel for a crown prince to communicate anything meaningful to a crown princess candidate before the formal ceremony. But eventually, he needed to give her real reasons. He thought, the first real reason is, I see you. I know what you are doing and I am not going to look through you. I made that mistake once already and I am not going to make it again. He could not say that to her yet. He thought, so I will show it instead. Starting from the first day she steps inside these walls. He picked up his chopsticks. He thought. She thinks she is entering a palace where a man who does not love her holds the power. She does not know that the man has been building her a position from the outside for months. She does not know that the man knows exactly what she is capable of and considers it the most significant political asset he has ever encountered. He thought. She is going to be very surprised. He thought. That is fine. Surprises can be good. He thought. She is going to be angry first. He thought. That is also fine. She is magnificent when she is angry. He set down his chopsticks. He thought. I should not be thinking things like that. He thought. She said if she is reborn she will never choose to love me again. He thought. She is reborn. She is choosing not to love me. She is choosing anger and strategy and survival and independence. He thought. I think those are all things she should have. I think she should have all of those things and also someone who is paying attention this time. Those do not have to be mutually exclusive. He thought. She is going to disagree with that assessment. He thought good. She should. She is not required to be easy. He looked at the letter from the Bureau of Rights. He thought, for months. The wedding is in 4 months. He thought. I have 4 months to become the kind of man who is worth the sacrifice she is making. He thought. That is not very long. He picked up his brush. He started working. She saw him with Haun on a Thursday. He did not know this at the time. He was at the scholarly exhibition, the same one where he had met Haun weeks before, conducting a formal review with his official delegation, and Haun was there as part of the household's cultural attendance, and they were standing near the same display of historical documents they had stood near before, and he was saying something quiet to her, and she was looking at the documents and something in her posture was different from her usual performed warmth. He was conducting an investigation. He was gathering information. He was trying to understand whether their last conversation had held and whether she had been able to maintain her position in the second prince's network without giving herself away. He did not know that in the outer courtyard, partially obscured by the visitors moving through the exhibition space, a young woman in formal noble presentation clothes was standing very still. He did not know that she had come to the exhibition with her father, the first formal public appearance of the crown princess candidate since the announcement, a managed social obligation designed to establish her visible presence in the court's social circles. He did not know that she had rounded a corner inside the exhibition hall and seen him across the room, the crown prince, her future husband, the man she had agreed to marry because a worse alternative had been blocked and because her father had told her the shape of her cage. Standing close to a woman she did not recognize, speaking quietly, in the particular quality of quiet that meant the conversation was private. He did not know what her face did. He did not know that she stood there for exactly 4 seconds. Measuring, assessing, arriving at a conclusion, and then turned and walked back the way she had come with the composed efficiency of someone who had found the answer to a question she had not wanted to ask. He did not know any of this until 3 weeks later, when a report crossed his desk from a palace intelligence source noting that the Crown Princess candidate had been observed at the exhibition and had departed earlier than her official schedule indicated, and that her expression upon departure had been noted by multiple attendants as, the phrase the report used was controlled and cold. He read that phrase and felt something sink through him. He sat at his desk with the report in his hands and thought, she saw me with Haun. He thought, she does not know why. She has no context for the conversation she witnessed. She saw a man who was 4 months from marrying her standing close to a woman in a private conversation, and she drew the logical conclusion. He thought, she drew the wrong conclusion, but she drew the logical one. He thought, of course she did. She is the most precise reader of situations I have ever encountered. She looked at the available evidence and she reached the most accurate conclusion the available evidence supported. The problem is that the available evidence was incomplete. He thought, I cannot tell her why it was incomplete without telling her everything. And telling her everything means telling her about dying and waking up and what he knew and how he knew it, and that is a conversation he was not prepared for. He thought, she is going to enter this marriage believing I chose Haun again. He thought, she is going to enter this palace angry. Not in the specific way of someone who was hurt by a person they loved. She did not love him yet, in this life she barely knew him, but in the general way of someone whose worst expectation has been confirmed before the thing it applies to has even officially begun. He thought, she is going to decide something. I do not know what, but she will decide, because she is not a person who experiences things passively. She experiences things and then she acts on them. She turns pain into architecture. He thought, I need to know what she decides. He sent a very careful, very indirect inquiry through a channel that could not be traced back to him, requesting to know the Crown Princess candidate's current position on the upcoming marriage arrangements. The answer came back in 2 days. She had agreed to proceed. She had withdrawn all remaining objections. She was cooperating fully with the Bureau of Rights on the wedding preparations. He read this and did not feel relief. He felt the specific unease of someone who knows that full cooperation from a person who was recently fighting everything is not a sign of peace. It is a sign of a decision made, a direction chosen, a strategy engaged. He thought, what are you planning? He thought, whatever it is going to surprise me. He thought, she always does. I need to pause here, because this is the part of the story where both of them are in the dark about each other, and both of them are about to make decisions that will change everything. He suspects she is planning something. He does not know what. She has decided something. She is not going to tell him what. And in the space between those two unknowns, the second prince is still moving. Haun is sitting on a secret that could destroy the entire structure. The wedding is 3 months away. Comment. Do you think she is going to do what I think she is going to do? Have you figured out what her plan is? Tell me below. Like this if this story is living in your chest the way it is living in mine. Subscribe. Part 3 is the explosion. This was the fuse. She had a plan. He knew this the same way he knew most things in this life. Not from information exactly, but from the shape of the absence of information. She had gone quiet in a very specific way. Not the quiet of someone who had accepted their situation. The quiet of someone who had stopped fighting openly because they had found a different kind of fight. He needed to know the shape of it. He thought about what he knew of her. He thought about the woman she was, and not the woman from the first life, though she was that too. The woman of this life, the one he had seen in pieces. The procedural objections, the exhibition departure, the full cooperation that followed the seeing. The pattern of a person who fights until she understands the dimensions of the space she is in, and then stops fighting and starts building. He thought, she saw me with Haun. She concluded I chose Haun again, that history was repeating, that the man who was going to be her husband was going to do what the man in her memory had done. Fill the palace with a woman he actually loved while she stood in the formal position and was visible and useless. He thought, that conclusion sent her somewhere. Not toward the marriage as she had originally been fighting it, passively from the outside. Toward it differently, with something in her hands. He thought, what would I do if I were her? If I had her intelligence and her anger and her understanding of the court, and I had just confirmed that the man I was being forced to marry was going to do what I had most feared, what would I do? He thought. I would not fight the marriage anymore. I would enter it, on my own terms, and I would build something inside it that belonged to me, something that could not be taken away. He thought, a child. He thought, his child. He thought, if she has his child, if she enters the palace, fulfills the formal role, produces an heir, then her position is secured regardless of what he does. She is not the invisible crown princess who managed from the shadows and had nothing to show for it. She is the mother of the heir. That is a different kind of power entirely. He thought, and if she has the heir, and the second prince sees that the crown princess has the heir and the crown prince has Haun, but not the power that should be consolidating around him, what does the second prince do? He thought, he moves. He moves faster. He uses the heir as the final piece of the argument. The crown prince is unstable, distracted, politically compromised, and there is an heir who can inherit if the crown prince is removed. That is the argument. That is the second prince's endgame, updated for a world where the crown princess has produced the leverage herself. He thought. She does not know she is walking into that. She thinks she is building a position that protects her. She does not know the second prince will use that position as a weapon. He thought. She is going to let the second prince move because she thinks the result benefits her. She does not know what the result actually is. He thought, I need to stop this. He thought. How? He thought. I cannot tell her I know what she is planning. I cannot tell her I know about the second prince's endgame. I cannot tell her I know what she saw at the exhibition and what it made her decide without admitting that I have been tracking her decisions, which raises the question of why, which leads back to the conversation I cannot yet have. He thought, I am running out of options that do not require me to say the thing. He thought, the thing she does not want to hear. The thing he has been carrying since the morning he woke up in this room and understood what he had been given back. He thought, I remember you. I remember dying beside you. I remember that the last 2 years of your life in the first version of this were spent in invisible service to a man who did not look at you, and that when you died you said you would never choose to love him again, and I was that man, and I am not going to be that man again, and I need you to know all of that before you make a decision that is going to put you in the path of something I am not sure either of us survives a second time. He thought, I cannot say that. He thought, I have to say something. He thought, I have 3 months. He went to find her. Not through official channels. Not through her father or the Bureau of Rights or any of the managed processes that were running their course toward the wedding. He found out where she was going to be. A formal cultural presentation at a noble house in the outer city, one of the pre-wedding social obligations that the Bureau had organized, and he arranged, without announcing it in advance, to be present. She saw him the moment he arrived. He watched her see him, the brief stillness, the immediate recomposition, the chin lifting by exactly the degree required to produce a perfectly neutral expression. She was very good at this. He had always known she was very good at this. He crossed the room. He said, Lady UNSSI. She said, Your Highness. The formal address, the correct distance in her voice. He said, May I speak with you for a moment? She said, The Bureau. He said, Not formally. Briefly. He held her eyes. Please. A pause. Something moved behind her expression. Not softening. Something more complicated. The look of someone calculating whether she can afford to refuse. She said, Of course. They stepped to the side of the room. Not out of it, not private, but with enough distance from the nearest attendants to speak without being heard. He said, You have withdrawn your objections. She said, Yes. He said, Why? She looked at him. A slight pause. I understood my situation more clearly. He said, Your father told you about the second prince's request. A beat. Yes. He said, And you understood that the alternative was not simply being free of the selection. The alternative was a different cage. She said, Yes, that is how I understood it. He said, I want you to understand something else. She looked at him with the expression he recognized as her most careful one, the one that did not reveal what was happening underneath. He said, Whatever you have decided, Whatever plan you have made based on what you understand the situation to be, I want you to know that your understanding may be incomplete. She said very quietly, I see. He said, I am not. I cannot explain fully. Not here, not today. I am asking you to hold your decision, not to abandon it, just to hold it, and give me time to give you more information. She looked at him for a long moment. He watched her face and saw the calculation running. Whether to trust this, whether this was itself part of something she was not seeing, whether the crown prince who had stood close to a woman at an exhibition asking her to wait was someone whose request for patience had any weight. She said, What information? He said, Everything I know about the second prince. About how, about why. He stopped. He was very close to it. The edge of the real conversation. He could feel it. About why things are not what they appear to be. She said, That is not specific. He said, No, not yet. He held her eyes. I need 3 weeks. That is all I am asking. She said, And if I say no? He said, Then I will not stop you. Whatever you decide, I will not stop you. But I will have to live with what happens next. And so will you. She looked at him. The room continued around them. The polite noise of a formal cultural event. Court ladies moving, officials speaking, everything ordinary. He stood in the middle of it and waited for her to make a decision that was going to determine the shape of everything. She said, 3 weeks. He said, Yes. She said, After 3 weeks, you will tell me everything. He said, Yes. She said, Everything. He said, Everything I know, without managing it. She looked at him for one more moment. He thought he saw something very brief, very deep. That was not the composed surface but something underneath it. Not quite hope. The careful, suspicious predecessor to hope. The thing that exists before you let yourself hope, when you are a person who has been very careful about hope. She said, 3 weeks. She turned and walked back to the social gathering. He stood very still for a moment. He thought, 3 weeks. He thought, I have 3 weeks to figure out how to tell a woman who remembers dying in my arms that I remember it too. He thought, that is not enough time. He thought, it will have to be. He looked at the room full of people doing ordinary things. The polite noise, the court ladies, the officials, the whole elaborate machinery of the world continuing to run while 2 people stood inside it carrying the weight of a different story. He thought, she said she would never choose to love me again. He thought, she has 3 weeks to decide whether she meant that. He thought, I have 3 weeks to give her a reason to not mean it. He thought, all right. He thought, begin. End of part 2. Part 3 recap. What is in play going into part 3? 1. He has 3 weeks to tell her the truth, or lose her to the plan she has already made. 2. Haun is sitting inside the second prince's network, pretending to cooperate, holding her mother's record, waiting for his signal. And every day she waits is a day the second prince might notice something is wrong. 3. The second prince does not yet know his plan has been compromised. But he is patient and he is watching, and the crown prince has been moving in ways his brother cannot yet fully explain. And men like the second prince do not stay comfortable with explanations they cannot find. 4. The crown princess's plan, whatever it is exactly, is 3 weeks from either being abandoned or executed. And if it is executed, it gives the second prince exactly the piece he needs to make his final move. 5. Somewhere in a private room, Haun is reading her mother's record and understanding, for the first time in 11 years, who actually killed her. And that understanding is going to have to go somewhere. Part 3. The truth comes out. All of it. From everyone. Subscribe so you are there when it does. Extended scene. Lee Jung-hyun had a specific ritual for the end of each day. He dismissed his attendants at the 8th hour. He sat alone at his desk with a single candle and went through the day's events the way a general goes through a battlefield. Methodically, piece by piece, identifying what had gone as planned and what had deviated and what the deviations meant about the next day and the day after that. He had been doing this since he was 15. He was 21 now, and the ritual had never once failed to produce clarity. Tonight it was producing the opposite. He set down his brush and stared at the blank paper in front of him. His brother, Lee Jong-hyun, had always been contained. That was the word Lee Jung-hyun would have used before this month. Contained in his grief over the woman, contained in his disinterest in court politics, contained in the careful performance of his crown prince duties without ever reaching beyond them. He had been, from a strategic perspective, a manageable piece. A man whose blind spots were mapped and whose patterns were reliable and whose trajectory could be calculated with reasonable accuracy. None of that was true anymore. In the past 4 weeks, Lee Jong-hyun had blocked Lee Jung-gyun's marriage request before it could reach the king through force of his own argument. Met privately with Minister Yoon in a meeting that was not on any official schedule. Appeared, unannounced, at a cultural exhibition that should have been beneath his rank. And most recently, been observed in private conversation with the crown princess candidate at a social function. Standing close, speaking with the quality of directness that Lee Jung-hyun recognized as his brother's most careful register. He thought, something happened to him. He thought, people do not change this fundamentally without cause. There is no cause on the official record. Nothing in the court's documented events accounts for this. He thought, either something changed that I did not see, or something changed before I started watching. He thought, that second option is the more frightening one. He picked up his brush. He wrote 2 names on the paper. Aeun.
Lee Veong-gyun.
He stared at both of them. He thought, she has been feeding information reliably for 2 years. The information has been accurate. The access has been consistent. There has been no indication of compromise. He thought, but my brother is moving in ways that look like a man who knows where the landmines are. He thought, which means either he is very clever, much cleverer than I accounted for, or he has a source of information that I have not identified. He thought, he cannot know about the plan. The plan is in 4 people's heads and 3 of them are mine. He thought, unless one of them is not anymore. He set the brush down. He thought, I need to test Haun. He thought, not directly. Not in a way that alarms her, if she has been turned. A test that looks like ordinary information sharing but contains a piece of falsified intelligence. Something specific enough to be traceable if it surfaces in the wrong place. He thought, if she has been turned, the false piece will appear in my brother's behavior within 2 weeks. If she has not, it will not. He thought, and if she has been turned. He did not finish that thought. He did not need to. The completion of it was already known to him and required only the right conditions to become operational. He thought, I gave her everything. I gave her the knowledge of her mother's death. I gave her a target and a purpose and 11 years of protection. I gave her the tools to do what she needed to do. He thought, if she has taken those tools and given them to someone else, that is a problem I know how to solve. He thought, it will be a shame. But problems that cannot be managed any other way have one remaining solution. He had always known that. He had arranged it for other people on 2 prior occasions. He was capable of arranging it again. He blew out the candle. He sat in the dark for a moment. He thought, my brother, when did you start seeing clearly? What was it that opened your eyes? He thought, I should have moved faster. He thought, I will not make that mistake again. He stood. He crossed to his window. The palace courtyard was dark below him, the torches burning at intervals along the stone walls, the night guards at their posts. He thought, in 4 months he marries the Yoon girl. 4 months is enough time for the plan to complete what it needs to complete. 4 months is enough time for the accusation to be assembled and filed and for the military campaign to be proposed. If it all goes correctly, he will never reach the wedding. He thought, make it go correctly. No more deviations. No more watching my brother move in ways I cannot explain. He thought, move now. Move everything earlier. He turned from the window. He picked up his brush again. He began writing in the dark, working from memory, the way he always worked best. Lee Jong-hyun felt the second prince accelerate on a Wednesday. He felt it the way you feel a change in weather, not through any single event, but through the accumulation of small signals that added up to a direction. An official who had been reliable in his ordinary court behavior suddenly became unavailable for 3 days. A document that should have moved through the administrative pipeline stalled without explanation. Two of the officials he had identified as part of the fabrication network met in an unofficial location, not their usual meeting point. He thought, he is moving. He thought, he is moving earlier than I expected, and I need to understand why. He thought, Haun. He sent her a very brief message through the agreed channel. One line. I need to know if they have tested you. Her response came the next morning. Also one line. Yes. 2 days ago. He sat with that. She had been tested. Which meant the second prince suspected she had been compromised. Which meant that his own behavior, the court appearances, the blocked marriage request, the private meeting with Minister Yoon, had been visible enough to alarm a man who was very good at not being alarmed. He thought, I have less time than I calculated. He thought, the accusation is going to come earlier, possibly significantly earlier. Instead of 14 months, I may have 6. 4. Less. He thought, the counter-record I have been building is not complete. It is substantial but not complete. It would slow the accusation but not stop it. If it comes in 4 months, it comes before the wedding, which means it comes before the crown princess is inside the palace, which means she is outside the walls when the crisis hits, which means she is exposed. He thought, she needs to be inside the palace. He thought, the wedding needs to happen before the accusation. He thought, 3 months. I need to compress everything into 3 months. He thought, and I need to have the conversation with her before that, the real one, because if she enters the palace with the wrong understanding of what she is entering, she is going to make a decision that the second prince will use as a weapon. He thought, I have to tell her. He thought, now. Not in 3 weeks. Now. He put down the intelligence report. He picked up a blank sheet of paper. He thought about what he was about to do. Telling someone that you had died and come back to life was not a conversation that had an obvious framework. There was no protocol for it. There was no way to begin it that did not sound either desperate or unhinged. And he was neither of those things, and he needed her to understand that. He thought, she remembers too. She has to. She woke up the same way I did in her family home before the selection. She has been moving through this entire period with the same knowledge I have been moving with. He thought, we have been 2 people who remember the same death, pretending to meet for the first time, circling each other with the most elaborate and exhausting performance of ignorance in the history of this court. He thought, enough. He wrote 1 line on the paper. I know you remember. He stared at it. He thought, that is either the beginning of everything or the end of it. He sealed it. He called his personal messenger. He said, deliver this to Lady Yoon Jakyung. Her hands only. No witnesses. The messenger left. Lee Jong-hyun sat at his desk and felt the particular sensation of a man who has just made an irreversible decision and is now waiting to find out what it costs. He thought, she is going to come here. He thought, she is going to come here and she is going to be furious, and then she is going to be something more complicated than furious, and then possibly, if he was very lucky and very honest and managed not to ruin it, she would be something else. He thought, I remember dying beside you. He thought, I remember your hand in mine. He thought, I remember what I said at the end. And I meant it not as a farewell, not as a resignation, as a promise. If we are reborn, let us fight this marriage. He thought, this is the fighting. He thought, come and fight it with me. The last thing he did that night, before he put down his brush and allowed himself the uncomfortable luxury of anticipating tomorrow, was write a second letter. This one to Haun. It was longer. It contained specific instructions for keeping herself safe in the period that was coming. Who to avoid, what not to say, how to manage the test the second prince had given her in a way that did not confirm his suspicions but also did not require her to actively lie in a way that would unravel quickly. At the end of the letter, he wrote, you asked me once why I was different from him. I told you that what I was asking for actually served your interest. I want to add something to that answer now. Your mother loved you enough to encode her records and hide them and trust them to someone she believed would keep them safe until you were old enough to use them. She was right to trust. You kept them. You looked for the truth even when you were handed a false version of it. That persistence, that refusal to stop looking, that is hers in you. When this is over, her name will be cleared. I give you my word. Not as a prince. as a man who understands what it costs when someone who should have been protected was not. He sealed it. He thought, we are all, in our own ways, trying to correct something that should never have gone wrong. He thought, let us see if we can get this one right. He blew out the lamp. The room went dark. Outside, the palace settled into its nighttime sounds. The guards, the wind, the distant pulse of a city that did not know what was being decided inside its walls. Lee Jong-hyun sat in the dark and waited for morning. He thought, she is going to read my message tonight. He thought, she is going to know. He thought, tomorrow everything changes. He was ready. Truly the end of part 2. If that last line hit you the way it hit me when I wrote it, stay. Part 3 is the detonation. The second prince moves. The crown princess reads that letter. Haun makes her choice. The truth about Lady Jang comes out in the most public way possible. And the crown prince and crown princess face each other, for the first time in this life, with no performance between them. Two people who remember dying together. Finally in the same room with nothing left to hide behind. Drop a comment. What did she do when she read that letter? I want your prediction before part 3 drops. Like this video. Subscribe to this channel. Tell one person who needs this story tonight. Part 3 is coming.